when we think of something like Judean or Indian or Californian, like, yes, it's geographical, but it's not just geographical. And so the people who say, well, we can't really translate Judaios as Judean because it strips away the religious and tradition and historical context, I think are just missing it. Like, that's just not how we use words. I get what they're pushing against, but I don't know that the word Jew really carries with it at least John's intent for how he uses that word. Because we'll see it's clearly more than a religious term, and we see that right here in John 19. So Pilate, he wants to release Jesus, right? The Jews come and they're like, okay, we gotta crucify this guy. Pilate heard these words. He brought out and sat down on the judgment seat. I'm in John 19:13 in a place called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now, it was the day of preparation for the Passover. It was about the 6th hour. And he said to the Jews, behold your king. Okay, behold your king. And they cried out, away with him, crucify him. Pilate said to them, shall I crucify your king? And the chief priests answered and said, we have no king but Caesar. So the priests make a political move. They make a very clearly political move. Oh, we have no king but Caesar. They know exactly where they are. They know who really controls this region. And they know that if they don't play this political game, they will lose their position. They will lose their seat. Even, and we'll see this here, it comes up with Lazarus here in a second. So I just wanted to point that out. This is clearly a political move because this group is not only religious. They are religious. I'm not saying they're not, but they're also very political. And it's, maybe sometimes unfortunate how those things can obscure each other. But again, if we were to just translate the word Jew for the sake of preserving the religious connotation of the word, we will then lose this political connotation as well. Because, and I think John is doing this intentionally. If we look at 1 Samuel 8:7, Yahweh is supposed to be the king. He's the king of Israel. So if Jews are representatives of Israel, of course they come from the tribe of Judah. That's where the name comes from. That's where they are. They're in the region that was given to Judah, or the tribe of Judah. So again, Judean, right? If they were representing Israel, then they should say, Yahweh is our king. We have no king but Yahweh. But they're representing something else. And this, goes all the way back to Samuel. The Lord said to Samuel, listen to the voice of the people and regard all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me for being king over them. And so God gives them Saul, and the rest of the history is there. It doesn't exactly go well. Of course, we get David. We get a little peek, a little preview. But yeah, it just doesn't go well because the people have rejected Yahweh as their king. Now, back to this. It's really interesting what John does, and it's unfortunate that we often get this missed. So the leaders use religion as a guise for their political agenda. Wow, interesting. Maintaining power through religious language, but they're maintaining political power using this religious language. Now, here's why I think this is important for us today, because I think the same thing is going on. Why do people, I do think the people, the Judaizers, right? And I think like apostate prophet is like S tier Judaizer. First Fruits of Zion, they're not as high on the list. I actually think First Fruits of Zion does some good work. But there's political reasons why they want to keep the language vague, right? Keep it vague. Keep it, and just say the Jews as though it means kind of anything, from first century religious leaders in Judea to our modern religious group. And it's just, there's so much going on that one word, we're asking one word, Jew or Jews, to just do too much work. And so there's this political move that's wrapped in a religious guise, and I think honestly the same thing is going on today. Okay, I want to point out this video from Ash, even though I have his name written down wrong.
We do see this trend where the leadership is very corrupt and has very little to do with the rest of the people. And although they are allied with the stronger forces around, they really don't have a concern for what happens with the rest of the Jewish population. They're incredibly corrupt, they're power hungry, they are not authentic to the role they're claiming to be in charge of. They're, in the case of the high priesthood, they're not even of the priests anymore. They are the rulership, the leadership of the Jewish people all throughout that time period, with the brief momentary point in history where it was Mattathias, the high priest of the Hasmoneans, who was authentic to the role, who was legitimately trying to keep Torah law and a connection of the Jewish people with God and so on. Immediately following, there is this degradation where it goes back into Jews being obsessed with other cultures, Hellenism, idol worship, and so on, bringing in foreign powers to help them solidify their own little power that they have. And that is ultimately what leads to the demise of the Jewish people in the first century. It's also important to take the lesson from the greater context, which is that this trend has continued until today, where there are people that are somewhat part of the Jewish population that are incredibly corrupt, and they are in a leadership position, and they kind of dictate this face that the Jewish people have to the rest of the world, wherever they might be. And they are power hungry. They don't care about the rest of the Jewish population, and in most cases, they have very little to do with the rest of the Jewish population. However, they are leadership, they are power. And so when people look at the Jewish people, that's kind of what they see. Not only that, there is this sentiment in the Jewish community where all Jews are together, all Jews are brothers, everyone is part of, if you're a Jew, you're part of the group. However, that is incredibly destructive thinking, because there are people that you would include in that group who don't care about you. They don't care about the rest of the Jewish people. They care about money and power, and they are actually leading to a lot of major problems that occur in every generation with the Jewish people, where the Jewish people are then scapegoated, sometimes purely out of malice, but sometimes in response to these Jewish people that are leadership. They are corrupt leadership elites. They are not the rest of the Jewish people.
So I hope that clip from Ash is helpful. Again, it's helpful to sort of hear this from other people, and at least I don't know, build the case. Obviously you can disagree if you want, but I hope there's a reason for it. John is pointing out the nuance here, and there's just too much going on to be lazy with how we speak of this. So again, here's the other thing. We don't want to lose the religious connotation of the word, but we also don't want people to lose that part of their identity. I don't want to use a term that these first century people in Judea would not recognize. And even Jason Staples, and I was thinking about, I might do more on Jason Staples' book, but he points out that it's really shorthand. It's really a shorthand use of the word Judahite or Judean. He doesn't like the term Judean, but we don't want to purify. Yeah, we don't want to lose the remnant, but we also want to expose the lies of some people. Let's just call it what it is. Okay, so distancing Jesus, Paul, and New Testament figures from Jews and Judaism. Okay, so again, this is where I would say, I would just disagree with Amy Jill Levine here. The Bible distances them from Judaism. Look up the word Judaism in the Bible, and you will get two references, both by Paul, both in Galatians, and both referring to his former life before he followed Jesus. Now, is he a Judean? Yes, he is. Well, he's a Benjaminite, but he would have been of the southern tribe, the southern kingdom, and would have been tied to that Judean culture, that kingdom of Judah culture. But he left Judaism to follow Jesus, and he makes that very clear. I therefore find Judean more problematic than Jew as a translation for Judaios, in that it translates a richly polyvalent Greek word with a more limited English word. Now, I would say the same is true of the word Jew. We're trying to make the word do too much, and it's just not richly polyvalent. It doesn't have the strength to do all that work, and it's leading to a loss of nuance and inevitably to a misunderstanding. Now you can tell me if you're still hanging in there after this. I know I'm going long, but I do think it's an important conversation. If we lose nuance by just using the term Jew over and over again for various things, or if we're actually gaining a sense of nuance by realizing that, I think John uses this term more like we would use the term Judean than Jew, because clearly Nicodemus in chapter 3 is kind of different from Nicodemus in chapter 19, but he's clearly not part of this group in John 19 that crucifies Jesus, that says we have no king but Caesar. He's clearly not one of those. So, and I've said this before, but clearly the Jewish religious leaders didn't think Jesus was one of them either. So do with that what you will. Well, thank you for spending the time to dig into this a little bit with me. I hope that's helpful. If you wanted to dig in a little bit more with me in this conversation, the Who is Jesus playlist is the one where I'm putting all of my conversations about biblical translation, Jesus's ministry. We're looking at some of the biblical texts that will help us with this conversation about translation. It will. I will also post, if I do something through the Bible, as we look at the context of how we use these terms, how the biblical authors use those terms, I will post it in the Who is Jesus playlist. You can check out all the other playlists and all the other videos that I have, and I'll catch you in the next one.